Just about. She's going through. Shirley's entered, of course. So we are now.
Shirley Frost is on board, as usual. That's good.
Just about. She's going through. So we're live.
It says we're live, yes. Okay, good evening, everyone. Start with the usual prayer. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fills all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide on us and cleanse us from every impurity, save our souls a good one. All right, so we're covering a number of topics today, and yes, I'm sorry to those people who, a very small group who have been coming the last few months to give me support in church, but at the moment I couldn't do it in church because I'm isolating. So as people in church know, this is the reason why we couldn't have a transmission from church. So there you have it. Our first topic today is my mother and my brothers in Luke chapter 8, verses 19 to 21. So it says, then his mother and brothers came to him and could not approach him because of the crowd. And it was told him by some who said, your mother and your brothers are standing outside desiring to see you. But he answered and said to them, my mother and my brothers are these who hear the word of God and do it. Yes. Now, relatives, especially, parents, mother and brothers, very important in the Middle East. Even today, about 2,000 years ago, it's very special. And so you couldn't just ignore them. I experienced this firsthand in 1994 when Mashka and I went to the Holy Land, and there we were given the red carpet treatment by everyone because, I was the brother of the abbess of Gethsemane. So it's not that here the Lord is dismissive of his relatives, and especially, of course, his mother. The point he is making is that for him, spiritual relationships are more important than physical kinship. Those who hear the word of God and do it, as he says. All right, so that's a very short little passage. The next topic is under the general heading of the trip to Gadara. Now, as we discussed before, most of the activity of the gospel story happens around the Sea of Galilee, and mostly, in rather short radius. Occasionally, the Lord ventures further out in the province of Galilee itself, places like Nazareth or Mount Tabor. These are a little bit further away from the Sea of Galilee, or when he goes to the north part of the country, the regions of Tyre and Sidon. But otherwise, he's working in like the coastal areas of this lake. Now, you're going to hear a little bit of geography and technical stuff tonight. So first of all, how big is the Sea of Galilee? Well, First of all, why is it called the sea? Well, it's a large enough body of fresh water to be impressive in the arid Middle East. And so for that reason, it secured the name Sea of Galilee in antiquity. So its size, it's 21 kilometers. It's basically like shaped a bit like Tassie or heart-shaped. So it's a bit fatter towards the top and just narrows down, and it's longer north-south rather than east-west. And so it's 21 kilometers this way, the length north-south, and 13 maximum east-west, with a 53-kilometer shoreline. Very interesting historical writer, Josephus, author of 2 books, one on Jewish antiquities and the other one's called The Jewish War. It covers the rebellion of the Jews against the Romans in their first war. That's towards the end of the 60s in the first century, war that lasted 68 to 70 AD. And Josephus mentions that in his time, and he's a younger contemporary, I think he would have been a contemporary of Christ, even at a very young age. He mentions that there were around 220 fishing boats on the lake at his time. Now that's a large number of boats. Okay. As a matter of fact, in the 20th century, and not so long ago, in 1986, archaeologists, and maybe it wasn't even an archaeologist that first discovered it. It was a very dry year and the shoreline receded, and people found a boat, of which, of course, archaeologists were very interested in. It was one of these ancient fishing boats and is now in one of the local museums. And that the archaeologists have called it the Jesus boat. Because it would have been like exactly the type of boat used by our apostolic fishermen. And the boat is 8.27 meters long, 2.3 meters wide, and in its current state, it's missing some of the top part of the sides, but it goes up to 1.3 meters in depth. So that's a pretty sizable boat. Could easily take a dozen people or more, and a fair amount of fish as well, and would have a sail, one sail, and also oars to help along. So that's regarding the boat. Now, Gadara, we're talking about the outlines of the heart-shaped lake. So most of the time, the Lord's base was Capernaum, which is in the northwest part of the lake. But Gadara is diagonally across the lake in the southeastern corner, the land of the Gadarenes. And actually, the city itself was about 10 kilometers from the shoreline but all of that land up to the lake was considered part of that area of the land of the Gadarenes. Okay. Right, so let's now read that first passage. Before we do, I think I have to say that we're going to be reading it in, well, first of all, something that a little dialogue that happened before they ventured out in the boat and got into the storm. And that's actually in Matthew chapter 8, verses 19 to 22. That will be happening later. Just some more preliminary stuff to cover. Mark informs us that the trip to Gadara happened in the evening of the day on which Jesus Christ taught the people by the sea in parables, as he mentions in chapter 4. And these parables we covered recently in Matthew, because he puts more of them together, 7 of them. And the other 2 synoptics, fewer parables, but Mark in that section covers the sower, lamp under a basket, seed germinating in the ground, and the mustard seed. And then he writes, and with many such parables he spoke the word to them. On the same day when the evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. So this sets the tone and the connection for the chronology. Okay. That means that Jesus Christ taught in parables on the northwestern shores of the lake, where he spent much of his time, as I just said. So now let's read in Matthew chapter 8 about unconditional loyalty. Okay, where are we? Yes. And when Jesus saw great multitudes about him, he gave a command to depart to the other side. Then a certain scribe came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then another of his disciples said to him, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead. Now, Matthew explains the reason why Jesus Christ now wanted to cross over to the other side of the lake, because huge crowds were gathering, and now he just wanted to get away for some quiet time, or quieter time. Matthew is the only evangelist in this chronological context who reports the question of the scribe wanting to follow him, and also his words to one of his disciples, the Lord's words. Now, there's a very, very similar, almost identical story in Luke. Has an expanded response because it includes one more person. Here we've got 2 people, the scribe and the disciple. Luke has the scribe and 2 disciples with 2 different problems. But Luke's story is connected to the time of close to the time of the last trip to Jerusalem, which is a lot further down the track chronologically. So it's really hard to say what's happening here. I won't try to suggest any theories. We just, on this occasion, take the cue from Matthew, because it seems to be connected to this particular section with the parables, and then crossing over to the other side. Right. So the Lord does not allow the scribe to follow him. Remember, he says, birds of the air have nests and foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay down his head. It seems to indicate that the scribe had pretty mercantile sort of designs. This particular scribe, like the majority of the people in Christ's time, had visions of this glorious messianic kingdom, political glory. And he wanted to take this opportunity to get close to the future king. Now, concerning the disciple who says, "Let me first go and bury my father," it probably doesn't mean it literally, that his father had just passed away and that the Lord was so callous as to say, forget about that. It probably means in a generalized way that he wanted to spend time first with his father, who was a bit frail. Okay. But the Lord was probably concerned that if he went back and spent time with his family, who one could surmise were not positively disposed towards Jesus Christ, that it would affect his resolve, his commitment in following Christ. And he seems to be in that similar situation, vacillating in his resolve, like that other disciple mentioned in the passage in Luke, as I said, which is further down the track, who says, "Lord, I will follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house." But Jesus said to him, "No one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." So the Lord is being pretty strict here towards his disciples in showing to them that the level of commitment that he expects from them is, wow, it's pretty amazing. Now, these were not, the 12 disciples we're talking about here. Talking about a larger group of people who were just following Christ around. And they were part of that group of 500 people called disciples that he showed himself to after the resurrection. 500 assembled in one spot on the shores of Lake Galilee after the resurrection. All right, so let's have a look now at the next topic, and that's a storm calm. In Mark, just chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. All right. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now, when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with them. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" I was always interested how big waves could get on the Sea of Galilee. It seemed to me that it was a relatively small expanse of water, sheltered in a deep valley. It's actually part of the deepest depression in the whole earth, because around Lake Galilee, if I remember correctly, it's about 250 meters below sea level. And as the valley floor falls and the River Jordan flows into the sea, Dead Sea, it's 400 meters below sea level at the Dead Sea. Right. Now, the Valley of Jordan River, including the lake, Lake Galilee, or the Sea of Galilee that it flows out of. Actually, Jordan begins in the tall mountains of Lebanon. They are pretty tall mountains. Their average altitude is higher than the Australian Alps. So the average is 2,500 meters. And the tallest mountain there is over 3,000 meters, Mount Hermon. So we have this valley 250 kilometers long from the roughly from the mountains of Lebanon to the Dead Sea. So you have the tall mountains in the north, and you have this deep valley all the way down and past the Dead Sea. You include the Dead Sea, it becomes, and the rest becomes longer than 300 kilometers. So what you have here is a kind of a wind tunnel effect. You get the cold winds blowing from the mountains into this deep valley, north-south, and they can create pretty tall waves in the lake, even over this 21 kilometer. Because in the year fairly recently, in 1992, they recorded waves of over 3 meters in the lake on a stormy night, day, whatever it was. Over 3 meters. That's pretty impressive. So if you put a boat even like 8 meters long with 3 meter waves, it's still pretty scary. I know that because I've done some boating in the past, going out, an offshore runabout. Even when you get 2 meters, it gets unpleasant. And we're talking about smooth rollers, but when you get a lot of chop. You get 3 meters and a lot of chop from the wind waves. So it's they're a different kind of wave, very unpleasant. Right. So here Mark gives more detail than the other 2 synoptics in his story, which makes his story come alive. It's more interesting. He mentions that they went on this nighttime journey into the Sea of Galilee without any preparation. They just took Christ as he was, as he mentioned. He also mentions there were other boats following them. He mentions that the Lord fell asleep at the back of the boat on the pillow. And Mark is the only evangelist that records the words that Christ actually said, used to stop the storm. What would be the reason for this greater detail in Mark's story? Well, remember that Mark's gospel is really Peter's gospel, as we discussed at the beginning of this series of talks, because Mark was too young at the time when all of these things were happening. He was not one of the disciples, but he became secretary of Peter later on. And it was Peter who was asked in Rome by the Roman Christians to leave them a written account of the story of the gospel that he actually told them. Over quite a few hours probably. So he got his secretary Mark to write the story. So he, being a fisherman himself, keen fisherman, is always interested in detail that connects with these elements. Just in the same way that we get this from John's gospel. Now, John himself too was a fisherman, together with his brother James. So we got Andrew and Peter and James and John. So these two gospel writers, Mark and John, show special interest in detail about boats, fishing, and the Sea of Galilee. Let's now look at the story of the Gadarene demoniac. In Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 20. Let's read that story. Mark. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me. For he said to him, come out of the man, unclean spirit. Then he asked him, what is your name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, send us to the swine, that we may enter them. And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus, and they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed, who had the legions, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. They were afraid. Those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. All right, well, now Mark and Luke speak of one demoniac, while Matthew mentions two, which is a bit strange, but perhaps the one mentioned by Matthew and Luke was a more prominent one because of his ferocity, and so they focus on him. As well as that, Matthew's story is the shortest of the three synoptic stories. Secondly, Mark points out that no shackles and chains could restrain him. He cried out day and night, beating himself against the rocks. That's a pretty colorful picture of the ferocity of the demons. Luke adds that the demoniac was not clothed and was driven by the demons into the desert, while afterwards the people who came from Gadara saw him dressed in clothing and sitting at the feet of Jesus. Mark mentions that, we just heard that. Both Luke and Mark report that there was a great number of demons tormenting him, a legion. Now, Mark mentions that about 2,000 pigs perished. We see that the demons were terrified when Jesus Christ approached the demoniac. And patristic writers explain that the demon's only joy is in tormenting human beings. They are in agony without this consolation. It's, you know what? we know about this state of the soul from, sadistic people, sadists, derive joy from tormenting other people. Secondly, the demons thought that Christ might send them to their eternal torments. They asked him, well, according to Mark, not to drive them out of the country of the Gadarenes, where they set up kind of an area for their hellish activity. Luke says that they asked him not to drive them into the deep, that is, into hell. Okay. Now, how big was a legion in the Roman army? Well, numbers varied, but the range of soldiers, first of all, you had the infantry from 2,400 to 6,000 infantry, foot soldiers, and then each legion had some cavalry, between 300 and 400 horsemen. It was a very large and powerful unit of the Roman army. So why do the demons ask to be allowed to enter into the herd of swine? Well, first of all, it's the last chance to cause pain to, if not human beings, at least other creatures of God, even though there's these humble ones, swine, pigs. Secondly, and that was probably a more important reason, they wanted to cause financial and capital loss to the Gadarenes and antagonize them against Jesus Christ. We see that they plead with Jesus to leave them, because they were fearful that other things could happen. He could cause more damage, more harm to them, the way they understood it. Even though the Holy Fathers have subject the Gadarenes to pretty harsh criticism for their attachment to these pigs, which they weren't allowed to have. These were Jewish people living among a various blend of other nationalities there on the other side of the lake. They were forbidden to eat pork, but they thought, well, we can't eat it, we can still breed them, we can sell them, we can make money, and so they weren't really doing the right thing. But they represent this attachment to material things and attachment to kind of fleshly pursuits, because in the gospel story, pigs come up more than once as symbols of a moral impurity. All right. Well, this is it for tonight. Our operator asked me whether I should be doing this tonight, but I said, look, I'll be okay, even though I'm not 100%, but you wouldn't know from looking at me. Now the other thing is that next Sunday wouldn't work, so I decided against transferring it to next Sunday night, because there's going to be a vigil on the eve of St. Nicholas in the old calendar. And I just didn't want to leave this hanging in the air, because, well, we have to kind of make a bit of a pause over summer now. I normally stop all of my study groups over summer, and it's getting too close to school breakup. It's already happened in some schools, so the new calendar, Christmas coming up in a fortnight's time, and then the old calendar Christmas, the Theophany. January is very busy for priests liturgically, so I'll have to say goodbye for now, and probably, well, you'll get an email from Costa at sometime the end of January, giving you the date of our first session in the new year. So God bless you all, and coming Advent, and see you in the new year, God willing. Chris?
Yes.
No problems, no questions?
No problems, no questions. Thank you for all the study groups for the year past from everyone, and happy Names Day coming up for you as well.
Thank you, Chris. All right. It is truly meet to bless the Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, beyond compare, more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption thou gavest birth to God the Word, true Theotokos, Theatre we magnify.